Hello and welcome to this tutorial, this second tutorial, where I'm going to look at trains and how we can make trains do more things. So in the last tutorial on trains tutorial 1, I looked at using the TrackWorx package, which is available in the community in Crayta. I looked at using that package in order to make a train move around our game world. And it works. It was a success and we've got our train moving. And in this tutorial, I'm going to go a little bit further into TrackWorx and see some of the interactivity that is a part of that package. So how we can make the train that is currently scenery a little bit more interactive for our players and maybe even crucial for the game. So for this starting point, if you're not sure how to set up TrackWorx, there is a tutorial and a quick guide that will help you guide you through that. There's also a post on the forum. If you look at the package guides, Ed has written an amazing introduction to using TrackWorx and posted the tutorial videos on there as well. So go and check that out if you want to follow that way. Otherwise, essentially install TrackWorx, create your train track, make sure that you have a TW system added to your game world somewhere. Within that TW system, make sure that you are using the prototypes of the types of things that you want to use. So if you want to use the steam train stuff, make sure you've dragged on the steam train prototype template. Then each section of track needs to have a TW track section attached to it. And then you need to add a train to your game world and then connect the trains together. So those steps need to have already been completed to get to the level where we're at now. And from that point onwards, this is all the new stuff. So let's look first at getting the train to stop at the train station, because at the moment the train flies around and it never stops. And that's really exciting. But what if I want the train to stop at the train station? Well, the way we're going to do that is we're going to add a locator here. We're going to add a blocker script to that locator. The blocker script essentially tells the train that's on its journey round, stop at this point. And depending on a couple of different flags that might be set, whether the train should listen to blockers, whether the blockers are actually activated or not, if they're all true and it's all go, then the train will stop at that blocker. And then it's up to the user or the player or you as the coder to figure out how to restart that train, how to deactivate the blocker. So let's look at adding the blocker now. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a locator to this section of track here. And I'm going to add it to around the position I want the train to stop, although this isn't by any means, the position of this has no bearing on where the train will stop, but it's just a handy reference for us developers behind the scenes to know, oh, that should stop around there somewhere. So I've added my locator. I'm going to rename it something useful, station blocker. It's a blocker at the train station. So station blocker sounds appropriate. And then I need to add a script to it, entity add script, and it's going to be the TW transform script. And if I scroll down to the TW transform script, you can see that it has this blocker property, which should be already checked. And it is. And that's great. The only thing now is to set a couple more properties. So I need to set the track property, which relates to which piece of track this blocker is attached to, and the T property, the position on that piece of track that this blocker should activate. So the track is this piece of track. So just click on that and make sure that the station blocker has that piece of track in that property there. And then the T is the position on the track to stop the train, where 0 is this part of the track, like the first bit that the train hits, and 1 is the furthest part of the track that the train hits. So if that's 0 and that's 1, imagine it like a number line. In fact, if you're a left to right kind of person, then 0 here, 1 here. And that means that halfway in the middle, which is about where that locator is 0.5. Think about 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, 1.0. So set T to 0.5, and that means around the middle. Actually do that. Okay, and I want the speed to be 0. Yeah, that's fine. So that's all set. Now if I press F5 and test the game, let's see what happens. Here comes the train. And we can see that the train is slowing down. And if we look, the very front of the train is exactly on where that blocker was positioned and also where I set it to in the properties. So great, there you go, there's the blocker. That's set there. Now if I wanted the train to restart, that's going to take some kind of coding or interactivity. One thing we might want to do, just to discuss how we might be able to do that, let's put a button here that we can press to get the train to go. So with that button there, I'm going to click on the onInteract function. Let's just unparent that so we aren't there. Put it there. So with this freestanding button, onInteract, and I want to find that blocker. So I'm adding this onInteract property here. Let's get my station blocker. Where did it go? There. Drag that into the entity. The script should pre-fill to TW transform, and the function I want is set unblocked, and that will turn off the blocker, and then the train will be happy to go forwards again. And in order to turn it back on once it's left the station, otherwise once it goes once, it will continue being, the blocker will continue to be not active, which means that the train will never stop again. It'll only stop that once. So to make it active, we can just use a bit of track, go down to this TW track section script you've got attached to every piece of track, right? And click on the on last exit. We're going to set a binding here. It's going to be hooked up to the station blocker, TW transform again, and this time activate. Set blocked. So when we press the button, the train can go because the blocker is not active. When the last piece of train leaves this section of track, we turn the blocker back on. So the blocker is then active, and then the next time the train comes round, it should stop there. Let's test it out and hope it works. So running over here, does the train stop? It's coming to a slow halt. Lovely. Okay, interact with the button. Okay, off it goes. So there we go. So we've essentially got a blocker which stops the train at the train station, and we've got a button which turns off that blocker. And we're hoping that when the train leaves that bit of track over there, it should now have turned the blocker back on. Of course, we're not going to know whether that works unless we wait for the train to come back. So let's go to a nice place to watch the train. Maybe up here on this balcony. Maybe all the way to the top. Oh, it's fenced off. There goes the train on its merry way. It's just a short course, like a figure of 8. Goes round there, round Death Mountain. You know, called that because it's deadly, I guess. And here comes the train. Hope that blocker works. Otherwise it's technically another runaway train. And we had that last time, didn't we? Okay. And it's coming to a halt. There we go. And now the train will wait here until I press the button and everyone will be late. Never mind. Okay, so we've got blockers working, and now the train embarks or disembarks from the platform, disembarks from the station when we press the button. Let's leave that as it is and look at the next thing, which is really fun, and it's going to be about how to ride the train. So this is the carriage which I want to ride in. I'll look at the locomotive next after this bit, and we'll look at driving the train. But if we're a passenger and we're just riding the train, we'll probably be in this situation here. So what I want to do is add a seat into the carriage. Now you may think that there's lots and lots of seats in here. These are the physical mesh seats. But we want to add a kind of a Cody seat, a seat that's functionality that exists behind the scenes. So again, we're going to go and grab a locator and we're going to position it where in the carriage we might want to sit. There, that's a nice seat. Let's put it about head height. Okay, and we're going to call this rider seat, like that. We need to add entity, add script. We need to add TW rider seat to our seat. There we go. Now, in order to sit on it, in order for our player to essentially sit there, actually, I'm going to just make sure we're looking out the window ever so slightly. So just rotate that a little bit. There you go. In order to sit on that, we need to do a couple of things. The first one is when we interact with this carriage, that's when I want to sit on there. Now, you might do some other event where you interact with a specific seat, or whether you want to do like interacting with the door itself. I'm just going to be very abstract, and you can interact with the train in general and sit down. So I'm going to click on this train steam coach body, click on the on interact binding, and then find my rider seat, add that as the entity. The script is TW rider seat, and what I want to do is sit. And notice that it's going to be asking for the player, so that's good because the on interact function sends the player. So click sit there. Now, in order to sit properly, we actually need a camera, a separate camera from our player's camera, because if it's on our player's camera, then it could get a bit juddery or whatever as the physics and the animations and all that sort of stuff. So to finish this bit off, go to your player template, add a camera, entity add, entity create child camera, and then with the camera selected, we need to add the TW rider camera script to the camera. You don't need to touch anything else, just leave that as it is. Stop editing that template. So we've got the on interact function, and that makes our player sit in the carriage. Let's test that out and see what happens. Okay, so I'm sitting in the carriage. It's more like I'm lying down in the carriage. Let's see if there's any errors. No errors. The reason it's positioned like this is just that the locator is positioned incorrectly, but otherwise the functionality works. So let's just reposition that locator and make sure that it's accurate. So my rider seat locator 000, let's set it to that, and then just rotate it 45 degrees on the blue one, and let's see what happens now. Because it's attached to this carriage, the rotation will be relative to the carriage, and so 000 points it in the same direction as the carriage. And then by just turning it slightly, it means we can look out of the window. There we go. So we're now riding on the train. Feels a little bit low, and I'd like it if the train moved when I did that. So let's make some tweaks. Clicking on my rider seat, move it up ever so slightly, like that. And with the rider seat still selected, if we scroll down in here, there's these new events that we can hook into on rider sits, on occupied, etc. So on rider sits, let's add an event binding to that. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn off the blocker once we're sitting in the train. So it will wait for us to sit, and then it will turn off the blocker. So let's get that station blocker that we made earlier. So now, rather than needing to get out and press the button, then run back into the train and interact with the back of the train to jump on, when we sit down, the train knows we're ready. Station blocker, TW transform, and we are going to set unblocked. So we're essentially doing the same thing that we had on this button over here, except now the event that calls it is when we sat in the back of the train. So running to the back of the train. I don't actually need to wait for it to stop, although that might be some functionality you want to add to your train. Jump on the train, press E, and away we go. We're now sitting on our train, and it's on its merry way. And one thing that's really cool about this is when you go around corners, there's a little bit of inertia added to the camera and all sorts of stuff like that. So yeah, it's a really fun thing to add to your game. It might be a really nice introduction to your game world, giving the player a tour so they can see where everything is before allowing them to get into the nitty-gritty of whatever your game is doing. Yeah, that's essentially how to ride the train. Now, this is lovely, but how do we get off? And this is a little bit more tricky and involves a little bit of coding. So we'll stop running that part of the game now. Let's look at how we might disembark. So now that we have our seat, we need, when we have added our seat, and if we go to our rider seat here, you can see that one of the properties here is this rider control template. And this is really set up so that you can add a template of additional controls to your player when they enter the train. So when your player enters the train, something gets added to their player character in the game world that gives players more functionality, whatever that might be. So we'll use the same sort of thing when we're driving the train. But at the moment, we just need a way to exit. We want to press interact probably to exit the train. We pressed interact to enter the train. Makes sense to press interact to exit the train. So to do that, we are going to make some controls for our player. So, and it needs to be on a template. So we need something physical, like a locator. We'll just start with that. Put it anywhere, doesn't matter where. The locator is going to be called cab controls. And we're going to add a script. And new script, this is going to be called cab controls script. And then I'm going to open that for editing. So there's a couple of things that we will need to grab when this is added to our player character. So we sat down, and behind the scenes, the TrackWorx stuff is now adding this script to our player. And when it does that, it sends through two things, or it sends through a bunch of things actually, but two things that we really need. One is the rider, type is an entity, and the other is rider seat, also an entity. And we need to capture those, and the function that is called when we do that, just checking here, we hook into this function that's automatically called by TrackWorx, cab control script on assigned to rider, camel humped like that, and then that's going to pass us a rider, rider seat, and rider cam. The properties we need are self.properties.rider equals rider, self.properties.rider seat equals rider seat, like that. And then in order to leave the train, which is what this is all for, we need to grab hold of one of the button presses. Remember, this is added to our player's character, so we can now listen for button presses and stuff like that. So on button pressed, and that will pass in the button name. If the button name is equal to interact, then what we need to do is get hold of the seat we're in, local seat self.properties.rider seat, and actually this, what we need from the rider seat is the TW rider seat script. And then if that exists, then seat will call the function rider get out, self.properties.rider nil true. Okay, woo. So seems a little bit daunting, but actually what this is doing is basically once you're on the train, this script gets attached to the player. When the player presses the interact button, it will call the rider get out function from the seat, and that will essentially handle all the other stuff. One of the things that that rider seat is going to be looking for is whatever piece of track it's on, if it allows disembarkation or not, and if it does, where the player should be spawned when they disembark. So we can allow disembarkation on these bits of track here because they're at the station, and we can deny disembarkation on all the tracks going around there where they would essentially just be in the middle of nowhere and it'd be quite dangerous. If your train was traveling quite slowly and you wanted it to be one of those get on, get off type of trains, then you can totally do that on the seat. If we put in seat here, and you can click this can disembark anywhere part, and it says, does the seat always allow you to get out, or does it check the track section to find out if it's permitted? Like that. So we'll have that off because we only want to allow our players to get out at the station. And let's make sure that that's possible. So we'll allow disembarkation. We need a muster point. So let's just put it, actually, we can just use the start location as our muster point. Boom. Okay, that's that bit. But also if the train was on that, we should probably allow disembarkation from there, start location, and just in case the very edge of the rear carriage is on this part, let's do that too. So these three bits of track will essentially allow us to disembark and put the player there. Yeah, that should, we didn't set the, one thing we needed to do is when we join that train, so when we jump on that bit of train, let's go back to finding our seat. We made this cab control script, didn't we? But we didn't actually turn it into a template. So going back to the cab controls, template, create new template, cab controls, template. Okay, so that now exists in our templates over here. Let's delete it from our game world. We don't want it there. And then with our train selected, we need to find our rider seat and put our rider controls template in there. We can also make sure that we hide the rider just in case. Okay, good. So now we should be able to enter and exit the train. So run down here, enter the train, press E, exit the train. There we go. I'm not going to wait for it to go all the way around. I'm just going to jump out while it's moving at the station. We're just proving the functionality at the moment. So it's now possible to enter the train, ride it around the train track, and exit the train using those steps. So for that second bit, we had our rider seat, and all we did was we created a locator, added a new script to that locator called cab control script, added this functionality here, listened out for the interact button, and then called this rider get out function from the TW rider seat script attached to the rider seat. And we also had to make sure that any track that we allow our player to get out of the train on, so these bits of track here where the train's at the station, you need to make sure that they have the allow disembarkation checkbox checked and a point to put the player in the disembarkation point. So I've just used the start location as our muster point, but you can use any locator for that. Okay, so that's riding the train. The last part of this tutorial is about driving the train. So it's actually quite similar to start setting this up to riding the train. What we can do is, if we take our rider seat that we already have, let's duplicate that, Control C, Control V, and then let's move that rider seat 1 to the locomotive train, position it at 0, 0, 0, so it's within the locomotive. Oh, I've just positioned the locomotive train. There. So now the rider seat is under that train. Let's position it where we want to see from our camera again. I want to see out of this porthole here, and a little bit more that way. And let's just remove that rotation we had on the locator. So we're not looking out the window, we're looking dead ahead. Okay, and just like before, with this rider seat here, because I've copied and pasted it, we've still got this on rider sits, deactivating the station blocker. We've still got the cab controls template set up. So that's one reason to copy and paste this one. We've got that rider seat. The other thing we need to do is set it up so that we can interact with this part of the train and get on the rider seat. So with this part of the train selected, I'm going to click the on interact function and add a binding. And this is going to be for my rider seat 1. So that one there, add that seat. Rider seat was on, this one was on the coach, this one's on the locomotive. Add the rider seat, and we're going to simply, the same as before, sit. Okay, and so let's just check that that bit works before we get into driving the train. Interact with that bit of the train, and we're looking out the window. And I can, because I copied and pasted it, it's still got that functionality so that I can get out. So when it comes to driving the train, I know nothing about driving a train. I've never driven a train. So I'm having to kind of imagine what it might be like to drive a train. You may have a little bit more knowledge on this area than me. In my train, I'm going to make it so that you can click on the mouse or click on the primary button to go forwards at a normal speed, let go to coast, and then secondary click or secondary button press to brake and reverse. If your speed is at 0, then it will just reverse. So you can essentially just go forwards and backwards. I mean, I'm assuming trains can't go left or right, but I might be wrong. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to just affect our cab control script. So, and we need to add a new thing to our car. So with our locomotive selected, at the moment, it just has this TW vehicle module auto drive, which we added in the last tutorial. I'm going to also add another script, add script TW vehicle module manual drive. Now, if you have both, then they'll conflict with each other. So one of them should only be active at any time. I'm going to turn off the manual drive because it's going to be pulling into the station automatically. When it gets to the station, I should be able to choose whether to get in the back and ride just in a normal seat, or to get in the front and drive the train. So when I interact with this part of the train, it should essentially flip these over so that auto drive is deactivated and manual drive is activated. So when I get in the rider seat, we're going to hook into this on rider sits function here. I'm going to add two bindings. The first one, I'm going to drag my train loco into there. The script is the auto driver, and I'm going to deactivate that. In this one, again, I'm going to drag the locomotive train. The script is the manual driver, and I'm going to select activate. So essentially, when we sat down in this locomotive, we flipped them over. On rider vacated, we need to make sure we do the opposite. So again, two bindings. The first one, TW auto driver, let's re-engage that, activate. And the second one, TW manual vehicle manual driver, and let's activate that, deactivate that. So we're essentially flipping the switch on and off. So when we get on the train, we can manually drive it. When we get off the train, it carries on being automatically driven, albeit that we might need to go and press that button to let it go. Okay, so that's this part. Now, how do we actually drive the train? So that's going to be in the cab control script. Remember, this gets added to our player regardless of whether they're in the coach or in the locomotive. So we can still use this to add functionality that we need to. At the moment, we're only listening out for the interact button event. Let's now listen out for, else if button name is equal to primary. Else if, and let's also listen out for secondary. And let's add some functionality for those two. So if it's primary, then I want to set my speed to 1. So we need to get hold of the seat. I'll copy that bit of code there. And from the seat, we actually need to get hold of the vehicle that we're sitting in. And the way we do, actually a script attached to the vehicle we're sitting in. So to do that, we get seat, which we've got hold of here. And we do get vehicle, which is a function that is within TW Rider Seat. Get vehicle, get entity. So get vehicle is getting the vehicle script, get entity is getting the physical entity in the game world that has that script attached to it. And then TW vehicle module manual driver set desired throttle to 1. So it seems quite long-winded, but essentially get the vehicle script, get the entity that's attached to, get the driving module that's attached to that vehicle, and then set the desired throttle to 1. When we hit the secondary button, we essentially need the same thing, but set that desired throttle to -1, so go backwards. Now, if I was doing this properly, I would write a function that does this, and I can just send it a number and it will do that. But to keep things simple, I'm just going to do it this way for now. So set it to 1, set it to -1. And finally, so that we're not constantly trying to go faster and faster, on button released, button name, and then in here, we're just going to, if it was primary or secondary, button name is primary, or button name is equal to secondary, then, and here we're just going to do this bit of code again, copy these 2 lines, paste them here, but instead of 1 or -1, we're going to set the throttle to 0. There we go. Save that, and let's test it out. So have I done everything that I needed to do there? I think so. I added functionality to drive the train. I added the switching over auto to manual and back again. When we enter this bit of the train, let's give it a whirl. So I'm on the train, I've pressed the primary button, and now the train moves forward. It's moving forward quite slowly, but that's because the manual driver has got a speed limiter and it's currently set to 250, which is quite slow. If I let go, that should be us coasting. So essentially just carry on the same sort of speed. And if I press the secondary button, we can see that I'm coming to a stop. If I keep holding it, it's not reversing. I don't think I've allowed reversing on my train. I think that's a good idea. Let's not reverse. I can't tell if there's anyone behind me from this angle, so I'm not going to do that. Okay, and there we go. So now I'm driving the train. So you might want to take this in new directions. You might want to make it so all of your friends can pile in the train and you can drive it around. You may want to have, I don't know, 2 trains alongside each other and gunfights between the 2, or trying to bake a cake between the 2. Whatever you want to do in your game in Crayta that involves trains, that's totally cool. Here are some more things that you can do with trains, and I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and find a way to use it and make your games more trainy, and I look forward to seeing them in Crayta.